Go on
Yeah.
then, Mr. Windsor.
Yeah.
Talk to me about this Ferrari circumstance,
Mm.
particularly viewed through the lens of Sir Lewis Hamilton, because he said some things after qualifying. I felt I was growing more optimistic that Sir Lewis was getting his feet underneath the Ferrari table. It felt like the gap in qualifying, at the very least, between Lewis and Charles of late had been doing one of these, and it was
Mm.
Lewis wasn't beating Charles in qualifying necessarily, but it had been 3 or 4 tenths, and now it was a tenth or two. I felt like
Mm.
Lewis was finally starting to make progress, and then
Mm.
qualifying at the Hungarian Grand Prix happens, and it's like the comments, Peter. I'm useless. Every time. Maybe Ferrari need to change the driver. What do you make
Yeah.
of those comments, Peter?
Well, absolutely gut wrenching, really, to see a driver of Lewis's quality and stature saying that about himself. And shame on Ferrari, really, that they've allowed that to happen, because he should have been coached into saying nothing, really, rather than saying that. That was very sad to see. I'm still 10% wondering whether he was being sarcastic about it all, on the basis that maybe we need to see the full context of what he was saying. I know it was a fairly banal question, but we don't know the history behind Lewis and the journalists that ask him these banal questions. And so that we don't know that. And the context, I mean, he could have said, look, it's pretty obvious what happened. Oh, yeah, I'm a terrible driver. I've got to be replaced. It could be that sort of thing. I know nobody's saying that. And when you see it in black and white in print rather than listening to it, it looks pretty, cut and dry, doesn't it? But getting back to the point, he was, if you look at the first phase of Q2, he was within a tenth of Charles, and he was just the other side of the bubble. Charles was 10th. Neither of them were doing well. So then they go into the second part of Q2, and Charles goes 4 tenths, 3 tenths quicker. Lewis doesn't, and he gets knocked out of Q2. That's what happened. Now, on that Q2 lap of Lewis, he was 5 kilometers an hour slower through terminal velocity at the end of the straight on the beginning of the lap, than slower than Charles. And he caught Colapinto going into turn 6. Colapinto did the right thing. He just sort of stayed in a straight line, and he was on the side of the road. But for Lewis, it meant having to go a little bit offline into 6, which compromised the angle of attack for the curbs there. I'm not making excuses now. I'm just telling you what happened. And this comes back to what I was saying about Lewis at the start of the year, when I was saying I felt, and this is obviously wrong at the time, I felt that his relationship with Freddie Vasseur, which goes right back to Formula 3, would be the making of Lewis again, because Freddie would give Lewis all the confidence he needed to get back to being the Lewis we knew and loved up to 2021. And that there's nobody better on the planet than Freddie Vasseur to make Lewis comfortable in the team. That never happened. And that's another subject. And I'm completely astonished at how inept Freddie Vasseur has been in this area. But anyway, getting away from that, I did say that one of the biggest problems Lewis has got is that he's now over 40 years old. And when you're that age, regardless of how talented you are and how much physical ability you still have, you inevitably think about things more than when you were 23 years old. 23 years old, bang, you just do it. And you don't think about, this is the upside, this is the downside, the gain or the loss. When you're 40, you've been through so much, you've got so much road dust. There's something inside you which makes you think, risk it, what happened? And when Colapinto made him move offline, I suspect deep down inside, without even thinking about it, there was something in Lewis which said, I've got a slightly different angle going to the curbs now, I better back off slightly. And sure enough, he was a couple of kilometers an hour slower than Charles through there as a result. Not the fault of Colapinto, because he was there. And so that's what it is. It's over 40, overthinking it too much. And as I say, that to me, that's what Freddie Vasseur should have prevented happening. Otherwise, you don't hire the guy in the first place. And I assumed he would. And I assumed also he would tell Lewis not to be the brand that he's become, but to be the racing driver again, to be the Lewis Hamilton kart racer, Formula 3 racer, the guy that loves Macau, all the things that we know about Lewis. And I assume Freddie was the best guy in the world to do all that as well, because of all that history he has with him. but he hasn't. He hasn't done it. Now, you could say, well, it's not really Fred's fault because he's a 7 times champion. And how can you tell a 7 times champion how to think and how to drive and how to behave? Well, my response to that is you have to. Otherwise, you don't hire him, because it's pretty clear that those are going to be the issues. And Lewis Hamilton went to Ferrari with so much stuff, the amount of money he was being paid, the Lewis Hamilton brand. And the millisecond we saw him in that black outfit by the F40, it was pretty clear that he wasn't going there to be microscopically focused on just being a racing driver again. He was loving all this other stuff or doing all this other stuff. And I'm amazed that Fred allowed that to happen because he's just a racing driver. But if you want to go back to where all this started, there are two names that spring to mind, Michael Massey and Toto Wolff. Oh. Absolutely, for sure. And I did say that at the time. I said, this is not something that Lewis will be able to shrug off. Not only because he didn't win the championship and the way it all transpired, but all the other stuff that was going on as well. The hiring of George Russell instead of keeping Valtteri, or how bad the car was in 22. All those things added up to what is pretty clear, a major crisis in the career of Lewis Hamilton. And it all began then. The mistake Michael Massey made to restart the race when he did, and Toto Wolff not doing enough, I think, to defend the whole situation on behalf of Lewis. Toto was very much working on behalf of Mercedes. No surprise there, really. But from Lewis's perspective, that should have been full right to the end. And still today, you think, how on earth did they get away with that? Just a complete breach of the sporting regulations at a critical moment that lost a guy a world championship. That's unbelievable, really. And he led the whole race. And so that still taking its toll, even today, for sure. And if you add all the other stuff, the going to Ferrari and then getting older and then being a brand as much as he is, even more than he is a racing driver now. And I can hear a voice saying, oh, yeah, but Peter, race drivers have enormous egos. You can't tell them what to do. Well, don't hire them then if they're that incapable of listening and improving and developing. It was pretty clear when they hired Lewis that he was slower than George Russell. So what did they expect?
Go on then, Mr. Windsor. Let me play devil's advocate here for a second. So I always remember Toto telling a story about the Singapore 2018 lap that Lewis Hamilton was jet setting and going all over the world that weekend, that he turned up late to the Grand Prix because he was doing deals and sponsorship and all of that other stuff. And Toto tells that story through the lens of you always have, to get the best out of Lewis, you've got to unshackle him, right? Yeah, you've got to give him the freedom to go and do whatever he wants to do and turn up to the Met Gala, because getting a free Lewis, a bandwidth, a Lewis that's indulging his extracurricular activities, is to get an optimised fast Lewis on a race weekend. How then, Peter, if past this prologue, how can we expect Frederic Vasseur now to unwind that? Because Lewis has been sufficiently naturally talented as far as the gap between him and the rest, to where the Met Gala and all that other stuff never really mattered up until this point. So how can we expect Frederic Vasseur to say, listen, all that was brilliant when you were 35 or 25, Lewis, but now we're expecting you to dial it back ever so slightly? Indeed, I think the opposite, Peter. I reckon Scuderia Ferrari, trying to be a luxury brand, no longer a sports brand, bought into Sir Lewis Hamilton PLC and kind of wanted. That's half the reason why they signed him, in as much as the performance. So is it unreasonable, therefore, of Lewis Hamilton fans to expect the performance to continue in conjunction with all of the Sir Lewis Hamilton PLC? Can those two things exist in the same space, Peter?
Well, in response to the first part of what you were saying, Cameron, about Singapore and 2018, of course, Lewis was a very different driver then. He was super quick and capable of winning at any moment of the weekend. You knew he was a potential Grand Prix winner. And yes, you could say for sure, if he had been a little bit more focused, he would have perhaps got even more out of Mercedes that weekend, or indeed other weekends. And to that point, Nico Rosberg beat him in the same car, so we all know that. But the difference between that time and this was that Lewis was super quick and on the pace. And if he was really focused, yeah, he was devastating. Today, it's not the same, is it? Because he joined Ferrari, having basically been blown away by George Russell in a bad car. And he joined Ferrari with something to prove again, as distinct from being the Lewis Hamilton that was around in 2018. And whilst you say, in the way you've made up the quotes of how Fred Vasseur would potentially talk to Lewis Hamilton, of course you would never say, Lewis, it's time to button down and do this and don't do that and focus on that. You don't make it simplistic like that. You say, Lewis, you're here as a brand ambassador for Ferrari. That's great. Let's go through your schedule of what you've actually got to do for these sponsors and how we're going to handle that. B, I want to know how I can get the best from you as a racing driver if I want to have you back to where we were in the Formula 3 days. I want that Lewis Hamilton. And I want you to tell me what you need to do that. We'll lay on mega kart for you, 5 different kart guys you can go and beat every day here at Fiorano, whether it's coming to have lunch with the boys every day or whether it's you want to be at Monte Carlo. Don't worry, we can make it all work. But I want you to be the guy that raced with us. That's what I want. And I wonder whether that happened. And then beyond that, I can tell you now, Charles Leclerc is very, very quick and turns in even earlier than you do. And I've been watching you for the last 3 or 4 years at Mercedes. I know it's because of the tire issue. I know it's because it's a bad car. I know it's because of the bouncing. But you have got in the habit now of turning in quite late and breaking in a straight line. I want to see the Lewis we had in Formula 3. And I'll do whatever it takes for you to get back to that. But I don't want you to think you're going to get in the car and blow Charles away because he is as good as it gets these days. And you've got to raise your game technically there. And we need to look at ways of doing that. Maybe you can do it on the simulator, but I don't think we can. And you know the reasons why, Lewis. But I think it can still be done. That's why we've hired you, because we believe you can do it. But it's going to require a massive amount of hard work on your technique to get back to where you were in 21. That's the conversation I imagine he would have had with Lewis last December. You see, there's a difference between saying that and button down and stop all the extracurricular activity, being like a schoolmaster. You don't do that. You're working with the driver. Instead of which, it's now pretty clear. They all thought, whoa, Lewis Hamilton, he's even bigger than Ferrari. He's massive, massive money, massive brand, share prices quadrupled, whatever it did. The great Lewis Hamilton, 7 times world champion. We'll let him do whatever he wants. And now look, all the things that obviously had to be addressed and a top team principal doing his job would have addressed, weren't addressed. And that's where we're at. And that's why Lewis now is completely lost. He doesn't know if he's coming or going. And he doesn't understand he still probably doesn't understand how Charles is so quick. He probably talks about turn in or set up or this or that. It's nothing to do with that. It's very simple. He's driving the way Lewis used to drive. Wow. Nothing more, nothing less.